Let's get cooking right now with our NBA panel. It is consisting this morning of Nick Friar, Jeff Pratt. We also have Mr. Nick Whalen here of RotoWire. Hey, what was the biggest reason for the Celtics winning last night, Friar?
I mean, it was clearly the Celtics fans trash talking Draymond Green the entire time because obviously it really affected him. You know, I want to point out where Klay Thompson was upset and where Steve Kerr was upset. Draymond said, this is what I expected. He knew what he was getting into. He knows how to handle it. So I just think it's a bad look for everybody else involved outside of Draymond. But, you know, of course, he did play poorly. Either way, the big thing was, I think the X factor was Robert Williams in this game. Yeah. As much as Tatum, Brown, and Smart all did their scoring thing, Robert Williams did all the little things. Was it 4 blocks, 3 steals, 10 rebounds? So, and then plenty of stuff that doesn't show up on the stat sheet. So gave you a little bit in fantasy, but more importantly, he was a big part in Celtics winning.
Yeah, what do you think here, Whalen? I mean, Warriors lost, but like Klay Thompson might be back, which would be huge for them the rest of this series.
Yeah, Klay looked great. He was, a big part of the reason they were able to kind of shoot themselves back into this game, but then he went cold down the stretch. Once the Warriors essentially tied it back up, both Curry and Thompson struggled in the fourth quarter, and Boston was kind of able to re-pull away. The biggest thing that stood out to me, and it honestly felt like more. I think the final offensive rebounding numbers were 15-6 in favor of Boston, but it felt like all 15 of those rebounds were just massive for the Celtics. Even the ones that came early on, they all kind of led to really good second shot opportunities. I thought Golden State just wasn't doing a good job of boxing out. I thought Klay Thompson and Andrew Wiggins, especially, there were a number of instances where they're just not getting a body on anybody. They're kind of sitting there watching, trying to out jump guys, and I think Boston, generating 15 second chance opportunities throughout the game is what stood out most to me. The other thing, Golden State just can't get to the rack against this Boston team. You watch, it seems like everybody on the Celtics is able to get into the lane and either finish, make a pass to the corner, drop it down to Williams or Horford. Like Golden State is really, really struggling to generate good looks that aren't jump shots and aren't, coming out of the fast break. So I think Boston's defense and Boston's offensive rebounding are what won them game 3.
Yeah, Jeff, Boston's 16 rebound edge on the glass. It was evidence of like a forceful response here to Golden State's blowout victory in game 2.
Absolutely. I mean, the rebounds were huge. For me, watching the Celtics throughout the entire postseason, turnovers are what killed them. They would repeatedly beat themselves by just giving the ball away. And what happened last night? Well, they stopped turning the ball over when it mattered, and the defense stepped up in a huge way. It was the Warriors who had 8 turnovers in the fourth quarter alone. And Boston finally figured out how to effectively run them off the perimeter and make life difficult. And then from an individual player perspective, not just Robert Williams was great, but Grant Williams was great as well. Al Horford was solid. I actually think his 11, 8, and 6 stat line makes it seem like he had a greater impact than what was actually the case. But Rob and Grant brought the defensive intensity, and they made life extremely difficult for the Warriors attacking the paint, as both Nick and Nick, there's 2 Nicks on the show today. Yep. I was going to say both names, but as both of them have talked about before. And then they were extremely aggressive on the offensive glass and attacking the paint. They brought exactly what Boston needed in this matchup.
I mean, the Celtics almost let things fall apart, too, again, in the third quarter. But Ime Udoka said that he told his team, he looked everyone in the eyes and said, stop playing like a bunch of a-holes. And then they woke up right after that. Friar, Boston, though, now 7-0 following a loss in the playoffs. Golden State, meanwhile, is also unbeaten in the 2022 postseason following a defeat. And the Warriors have won at least one road game in their past 26 playoff series. So game 4, Friday. What adjustment do you anticipate the Warriors making in order to try to even this series up?
I think the big thing for them is taking away the secondary scorers. They talked about it in the first game. They did it in the second game. And look, I know that it was more Marcus Smart kind of stepping up. And yes, you got some stuff from Al Horford and a few other guys. But I think when they managed to stop Boston's secondary scorers, and not only impacts those guys from putting up points, it doesn't give Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown the outlets that they're looking for in situations where they're trying to make that next pass, because that's when one of the biggest things for the Celtics throughout since they turned the corner, they have been much better about just making the next pass, trying to find that best shot, taking their time in their half-court offense. When they can't do stuff like that, they're not as efficient offensively. So, I mean, and look, if you go listen to Draymond's podcast too, he's probably going to tell you to do that too. It's not giving anything away, but that's probably what they're going to end up doing in game 4.
Hey, Whalen, too, something to keep in mind is when Al Horford rolled over Steph Curry's, I believe it was his foot. Curry said afterwards had some pain in his foot in the fourth quarter. I mean, how much do you think a potential Steph Curry injury changes this series?
if Steph Curry is not, close to 100%, I think that tilts it probably in favor of the Celtics to a point where Golden State can't win the series. I think that's fair to say, right? Especially with how Golden State played in Game 3. I know Andrew Wiggins had 18 points, but it was relatively inefficient. He was only 1 of 6 from 3, had 3 turnovers. It's kind of been a two-man show so far. And like Nick said, Boston is getting contributions from, Marcus Smart stepping up with 24, 7, and 5, Derek White, Al Horford, Grant Williams throughout these playoffs. Golden State, I think the main difference between this team and the other, pre-Kevin Durant Warriors is, guys like Andre Iguodala, like he's a shell of what he was in 2016. Sean Livingston, Barbosa, like the great role players on those teams, they just don't really have that right now. And Jordan Poole is certainly capable of being that guy, but he's a little too inconsistent at this point. They didn't get a whole lot from him in this game. Didn't get a whole lot from Otto Porter. Gary Payton, it looks like, is not even capable of shooting a basketball right now. It's strange to watch because there's a lot of times last night where Golden State has 2 guys on the floor, whether it's Looney and Draymond, whether it's Draymond and Gary Payton, guys who just don't want to shoot the ball, are not interested in shooting the ball, and it's really bogging down their offense. So, if all of a sudden Stephen Curry is now limping around and he's at 70, 80%, I mean, he was at 100% for most of this game last night, and they ended up losing by double digits. So what does that tell you?
Jeff, the Warriors were the team to make adjustments in Game 2. Udoka and the Celtics made adjustments last night. Pressure defense. Celtics were more physical and aggressive. How do the Warriors answer back now? What's their answer to that in Game 4?
They have to do a better job on the glass. I mean, the secondary scoring is a huge issue, as both of these guys have touched on. But at the end of the day, the Warriors were out-rebounded 47-31 and then 15-6 on the offensive glass. And honestly, it felt like more. Boston is the bigger, more physical team, but there are still ways to keep them off the boards, and the Warriors need to figure that out in Game 4. I'm sure we'll see Steve Kerr make some lineup adjustments. We're going to get more Kevon Looney. I think that that's almost a guarantee at this point. We saw that he was able to take Boston off of the boards in Game 1. Obviously, the Celtics still won that matchup, but he was a major force. Will we see some Juan Toscano-Anderson? Will we see some Jonathan Kuminga? They're going to have to roll out some bigger lineups in this matchup, especially if Steph Curry is hurt. And yes, bringing in all of those guys takes away from your secondary scoring because none of them can shoot from the outside. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you can't corral the rebound off of a stop.
All right, Jeff, Tatum and Brown, we know they had big games. Curry put up game-high 31 points here. We come to expect that, though, from all of the stars from the start of this series. The difference, though, you guys have mentioned it, like Marcus Smart, some of these other role players here, those have been the X factors in these games. Who can have another big game in DFS lineups, Jeff, do you expect on Friday night? Someone besides the obvious choices here.
Yeah, I'll go right back to Marcus Smart here. It's no secret that he thrives off of energy. We talk about home court advantage for specific players. He feeds off of that Boston crowd more than anyone on the Celtics. And we saw a different level of focus and effort on both sides of the ball from him last night. On offense, he wasn't just jacking up threes. He was recognizing mismatches, attacking in the post, which is where he's incredibly effective given his size. He was just bullying Steph Curry every time he was on him. And then on defense, we saw it at the end of the game. Curry got it going in the early parts of this one, but Smart was all up in his grill throughout the entire fourth quarter. In front of the Boston crowd, he can absolutely do this again in Game 4.
Yeah, Whalen, and Klay Thompson did his best with a series high 25 points for him, too.
Yeah, Klay looked good early in this game. I mean, I think he actually started like 0-3 or 0-4, but kind of had that same level of confidence that we've seen from him throughout this series, and eventually heated up. I thought one of the key reasons that Marcus Smart was so effective in this game, and it wasn't just him for Boston, was they were really effective at targeting both Stephen Curry and Jordan Poole on the defensive end. And part of it was Curry, picking up the 2 early fouls. But I mean, Boston was just able to bully Curry over and over and over. And even if Curry didn't have the foul trouble, I don't know what he's going to do to stop Marcus Smart. I mean, he had a couple shots where he just kind of backed him down, shot right over him. Al Horford had him pinned a couple of times. So I thought Boston's role players did a really good job of seeking out those matchups and targeting them aggressively. I think Marcus Smart can continue to be effective in this series. You can kind of choose any Boston role player and make a pretty decent case for why they're a nice DFS play at a cheaper price, because virtually all these guys have stepped up at some point or another in the playoffs, whether it's Smart, Horford, Grant Williams in the Milwaukee series, Al Horford every now and then. Really any of those guys I think could step up. And on the Golden State side, I feel like maybe we see more Jordan Poole at some point. I think he's a big part of the reason that they've struggled defensively. I mean, Boston had like 125 points per 100 in this game, which is horrendous for the Golden State defense. But maybe Golden State feels like they just need to try to score with Boston, because it feels like no matter who they throw out there, they're having a tough time staying in front of the Celtics. So, maybe we see more Jordan Poole. Maybe we get an explosive Jordan Poole scoring game in Game 4.
Yeah, someone in the middle of the pack here, Friar, that you anticipate, could step up and would be worth rostering in DFS on Friday?
So look, I love the idea of going with Marcus Smart, but when we look at these games too, I can't help but wonder about the NBA's investments in these games as well too, right? We see the refs, and I think there's whoever the analyst is for ABC is talking about, yes, they call things differently within games. And when we're looking at this game, if we think that the Warriors are going to win this game, if they're going to try and extend this series, Steph Curry's going to have to step up. Klay Thompson's going to have to too, and maybe Jordan Poole, to at least two of those three guys. So I do question how Marcus Smart is going to be called throughout the course of that game. We saw what they just did to Draymond. We kind of suspected that coming in because of the stuff he was saying. Of course, Smart's not saying the same thing, but it could still happen to him. Could happen to Derek White as well. So as much as I do think Smart might be a viable option, I'm a little more interested in the Warriors side of things. I think Kevin Looney, you guys touched on a little bit before, they're going to need to turn to him more. So obviously when you're trying to adjust on the glass, when you're talking about the Warriors, he's really the only guy that can make that major adjustment outside of maybe Draymond Green, who, as much as he had a terrible game, and I was fading him going into Game 3, I do think in Game 4, he's going to have some semblance of a response as well. So those would be two guys that I'm looking at for Game 4.
Okay, so Friar, who's got the edge in Game 4 overall? In the DK Sportsbook, Celtics will be 4-point favorites currently at home.
So I still think I'm going to take the Warriors in this one, but right now the Celtics they obviously look great. Momentum has meant nothing to them throughout the course of the postseason, whether it's good or bad. It just has not meant anything, as much as they do have back-to-back wins a few times in the past couple series. And of course they smoked the Nets in 4. But yeah, I still think part of me is still leaning towards the Warriors, just because the NBA is not going to want to see this series end in 5. It's been too entertaining through these first 3 games, even though it's been a double-digit win every single time. So right now, the Celtics look great. I think that they are mature. They've matured immensely over just the course of this postseason, never mind the entire season. But I can't help but think the Warriors are going to have to pull at least one out in Boston.
Yeah, and Whalen, Curry's status will obviously move the needle here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would like to say that the series is even 2-2, and we get kind of a guaranteed at least Game 6. But the Curry thing is huge, right? I think he said after the game, it kind of feels the same as when I had my foot injured late in the regular season, which caused him to miss, I think, like 10 or 15 games to end the year. So that's not a great sign. And I think chances are he pushes through it. But like I said earlier, Curry played pretty well in this game. He didn't get injured until well after the game was pretty much decided. And Golden State still lost by double digits. It's hard to watch that game last night and then come up with a coherent argument for why Golden State will absolutely go win in Boston. I think that the Celtics team is playing really confidently. They've come out really in all 3 games. They've been the more aggressive team. They've jumped out to leads right away. And I think the play of Jaylen Brown has kind of changed everything, right? I think he was a guy that coming into the series, you still weren't quite sure exactly what you're getting, game to game with Jaylen Brown. And I think he has kind of flipped the narrative. He has been the more dominant player, I think, between he and Jason Tatum. I think when all is said and done, Tatum's probably going to have better numbers at the end of the series, but Jaylen Brown has been more aggressive. He's had the bigger kind of individual plays, it feels like. And, while Klay Thompson did kind of bounce back in Game 3, I think, you could say Curry and Tatum is kind of a wash, but the difference between Jaylen Brown and the Warriors' second best player in this series has been massive.
Yeah, Jeff, what's your early betting approach here?
The Celtics should have the edge in this game. I think both of the guys have been spot on here. They've once again showcased their trademark resiliency, and then they've remained undefeated coming off a loss in the playoff. But that being said, we've seen the Celtics team get really complacent coming off wins when they had a chance to take commanding leads in the postseason. Not only that, but we've seen them get really complacent at home. They have the opportunity to take a commanding lead in this series in Game 4. It's all about focus and execution on both sides. For me, from a betting angle, it's all about what we hear about Steph Curry in this one. If he really is banged up, even questionable coming into this game, I would lean towards the Celtics just because they are the better team in this matchup. And we've seen that they're able to execute. And when Curry's not hitting these ridiculous shots, getting the Warriors back in these ones, the Celtics are so close to pulling away into these contests. So if he's not 100%, I think the Celtics right now, I like them in this matchup. But if he's ready to go, he looks good heading into warmups, etc. The Warriors, they have enough in their arsenal to bounce back in this one.
Well, Jeff, I'm glad you mentioned that because Curry and Tatum, they entered game 3 as plus 100 and plus 115 favorites to win MVP. Now those odds are plus 105, and that's for Tatum, and plus 205 for Curry after game 3. Take a look at your screen. Is it still a two-man race? Or you think maybe even Jaylen Brown has entered the chat? He was plus 900, now plus 350.
It's absolutely not a two-man race. I think Nick Whalen did a great job of explaining it in the last question. Jaylen Brown has absolutely inserted himself in this conversation. And in my opinion, he's outplayed Tatum in this series. He went for 24-6 in game 1, 27-9-5 in game 3. He's really stepped up shooting the ball with Tatum struggling. Right now, he's making all the individual effort plays you see that are just statement plays for the Celtics throughout these games. If Boston wins the finals, he would be my pick right now at MVP. I understand that Tatum's going to get the narrative, especially with everything he's going on with him, tributes to Kobe, etc. But Jaylen has been the better player throughout this series.
Yeah, Whalen, so you would obviously consider sprinkling a little something there on Brown at plus 350.
Yeah, and with all due respect to Kobe Bryant, the Tatum Kobe tributes have been a little over the top, in my opinion. I've not have not been the biggest fan.
Yeah,
of what's been going on there,
I agree. I agree. Like the texting him thing was weird. I'm not gonna lie, and I like weird stuff. That was just a little too weird.
We know you do.
Yeah, just chill out a little bit, man. But right now, I think if the vote took place after 3 games, I think it would probably be Jaylen Brown, right? I mean, he has more points. He has more rebounds, comparable in terms of defensive stats. Tatum does have more assists. Brown shooting, 10 percentage points better from the field in this series. He's been better at the line in this series. He's playing 4 fewer minutes per game. Like, I don't think it's an exaggeration at all to say that Jaylen Brown has outplayed Jason Tatum so far. That doesn't mean that he's the better player, and doesn't mean that over the course of 6 or 7 games, Tatum won't, close that gap. But I think as of right now, Jaylen Brown is a really viable choice. I don't think I would dip anywhere lower than that, or anywhere higher than that, I should say, in terms of the odds. Brown and Tatum are the co-favorites for a reason, essentially, for Boston. Like Marcus Smart, Al Horford, you would need multiple big time performances from those guys, and you'd probably need Tatum and Brown to come up short, and then Boston to still somehow win those games. Like, you start kind of talking yourself in circles when you get beyond Tatum, Curry, or Jaylen Brown.
Friar, who would you bet for MVP right now?
Right now, I think I'd have to go with Jaylen Brown, not to sound like a broken record, but these guys did highlight it pretty well. Smart was the one long shot that I was really thinking, maybe he could if he has a nice bounce back, and then kind of has, he's pretty good about getting people invested in him just because he has, the theatrics and everything that kind of come with his play. But when you look at what Jaylen Brown's done, look, Jason Tatum has been consistent. Even in that game 1 where he didn't score all that well, he did everything else well throughout that game. Jaylen Brown, though, from a scoring standpoint, has been pretty much out there and out for blood. He is not messing around when it comes to this team. When it comes to the Warriors, he is trying to he's pouring it on early, and that's usually when he's at his best too, when he's scoring a lot in the first quarter, then Jason Tatum kind of doing a little bit later on. So I do think Jaylen Brown's making a case, but it's just Tatum is the superstar. I could see the narrative kind of leaning towards his way, but if you're looking for someone else to put a little sprinkle on, as you put it, go with Jaylen Brown.